Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Prime Minister Imran Khan says Pakistan is ready to respond to any Indian aggression. Khan said Indian ceasefire violations have increased since New Delhi revoked Kashmir's special status. Addressing a public gathering in Jhelum, Khan said Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is massacring Kashmiri Muslims. He said New Delhi has turned the occupied valley into a prison and it can stage any misadventure to divert the world's attention from the issue. Khan went on to say that Modi is turning India into Hitler's Germany. The Prime Minister said Indian people will eventually take a stand against Modi's oppressive measures. In Islamabad, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud met Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and discussed bilateral and regional issues. The Prime Minister thanked Saudi Arabia for supporting Pakistan's stance on occupied Kashmir. Earlier, the Foreign Minister met his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmood Qureshi on his maiden visit to the country. During the meeting, Qureshi said both the countries are looking forward to enhancing bilateral ties. Responding to New Delhi's unprovoked aggression, the Pakistan Army has killed 3 Indian soldiers along the line of control. Army spokesperson Major General Asif Ghafoor said an Indian post was also damaged in the Hajipir sector. The spokesperson said New Delhi violated the ceasefire in the last 36 hours. He said 2 Pakistani soldiers, Naib Subedar Kandru and Sipoy Ehsan, were martyred in the Deva sector along the LOC. He said the martyred Subedar belonged to Panu Akil, while the Sipoy hailed from Jhelum city. India's northern Uttar Pradesh state is demanding over 200 Muslims to pay for damages in the wake of protests against the Citizenship Law. Failing to do so, the state threatened to confiscate their property as a penalty. None of those who received the notices have been charged or convicted by any court of law. Countrywide protests against the controversial Citizenship Law continue in India. The government has suspended internet services in Agra and Mathura till Friday evening to curb the demonstrations. Protesters are demanding the government repeal the law which grants nationality only to non-Muslim immigrants. At least 27 people, mostly Muslims, were killed during the protests. A suicide car bomb killed 6 Afghan soldiers and wounded 3 in northern Balkh province. Officials say the attack targeted an army compound in Balkh district of the province. The Taliban have claimed the responsibility for the attack. Shortly after the bomber detonated the car laden with the explosives, a group of insurgents stormed into the compound. They set off a shootout with the Afghan forces. Provincial Governor's spokesperson Munir Farhad said fighting continued for hours before the attackers were repelled. The United Nations says over 100,000 Afghan civilians have been killed or injured over the past decade. In a report, the UN renewed calls to end the bloody 18-year conflict. This comes days after President Ashraf Ghani claimed victory in Afghanistan's presidential elections. The Election Commission announced that Ghani won a little over 50% majority in the 28th September polls. Talks between the US and the Taliban resumed earlier this month after they were abruptly called off by President Donald Trump in September. US President Donald Trump calls on Moscow, Damascus and Tehran to stop killing civilians in Syria's Idlib. In a tweet, Trump says Turkey is working hard to stop the carnage in northern Syria. Idlib is the last major stronghold of rebels fighting the government forces since 2015. Intensified bombardment by Syrian and Russian warplanes have forced tens of thousands to flee Idlib. The United Nations has called for de-escalation and warned of further mass displacement if the violence continues. A war monitor said over 170 combatants have been killed since 19th of December. Syria is currently grappling with a fuel shortage that's driven up the prices of heating oil and cooking gas. Supplies are tightest in Idlib, which is also facing heavy bombardment from Russia and Damascus. With the temperature falling below 10 degrees Celsius, the people of the northwestern city have been forced to burn pistachio shells to survive. More in this report.
Pistachio shell heat Heaters have become a big business in violence-plagued Idlib. A ton of shells cost $175 and can last the whole winter, while a gallon of heating oil costs $130 and will only last a month.
The heaters are cheap and pistachio shells more affordable than fuel. There's no heating fuel these days, and the people are trying the heaters. Thank God it's making their lives a lot easier. We're getting a lot of orders.
These heaters have caused a massive drop in demand for wood. This does not bode well for Idlib's displaced persons, many of whom depend on the local timber trade to survive.
For us, there's no work. So what do? We go up to the mountains and collect a bit of wood to burn and to sell. And we get enough to spend on the children. There's no other way to survive.
Residents of the Idlib's IDP camps are dependent on aid for food and clothes to keep warm. Despite the misery they face in these camps, they still aren't willing to return home out of the fear of being bombed.
The biggest problem we suffer from in the winter is the roads and the mud and the tent leaks. There are no toilets either. We sleep inside the tent and it leaks on us. The roads are really bad.
The UN estimates 100,000 people have fled the northwestern Syrian province since April. 1,000 civilians have been killed in Syrian and Russian airstrikes in the past 8 months.
Turkey says it will send troops to Libya following the UN-backed government's request. President Tayyip Erdogan said he will present deployment legislation to the Turkish parliament in January.
He said Ankara and Tunis had agreed to support Libya's internationally recognized government of Fayez al-Sarraj. Erdogan pledged to support Tripoli against Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army that is trying to capture the Libyan capital.
Hopefully, this agreement will pass from our parliament around January 8 or 9, and we will accept the invitation to send troops to Libya. This is the reason we are holding all these meetings. They are helping a warlord. We are standing by the legitimate government of the country and accept their invitation.
He also said Tunisia, Qatar and Algeria are crucial for a political solution to the Libyan crisis. Meanwhile, Moscow has voiced concern over the move.
Well, 7 people died after a boat carrying migrants sank in eastern Turkey's Lake Van. Bitlis province officials said 64 migrants from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan were rescued. The officials said the boat capsized as it approached the Adil Shabez district on the northern shores of Lake Van. They said 5 people were found dead at the scene and 2 died in a hospital. The lake is near the border with Iran, from where migrants regularly cross into Turkey, heading west towards Europe. In Yemen, 17 people were killed and 12 wounded in an attack on a market in Sada Governorate. Tuesday's attack was the 3rd deadliest assault on the same location in just over a month. 12 Ethiopian migrants were among the victims. The UN says 89 civilians have either been killed or wounded in the attacks on the market. Tens of thousands of people have been killed and millions displaced in the Yemen conflict since 2015. The United Nations has termed the war the world's worst humanitarian crisis. In Iraq, President Barham Salih refuses to designate Assad al-Idani, nominee of the Bina bloc, for the Prime Minister. In a statement, Salih said he would rather resign than appoint someone who would be rejected by protesters to the position. He said appointing Idani wouldn't pacify protesters demanding an independent Prime Minister with no party affiliation. The president said because the constitution doesn't give him the right to reject nominees for the premiership, he is ready to quit. Mass demonstrations have gripped Iraq since October, with the protesters demanding an overhaul of the political system. More than 450 people have been killed in the protests. Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi resigned last month as the protests continued, but he remained in the office in a caretaker capacity. In Iran, authorities have disrupted internet services in several provinces ahead of the planned anti-government protests. BBC reported outages, but the internet monitoring service NetBlocks confirmed a drop in usage. stage. Social media posts have called for renewed protests and for ceremonies to commemorate the dead. In November, a rise in petrol prices sparked anti-government protests across the country. Demonstrators expanded their demands to cover calls for more political freedoms and other issues. Amnesty International said over 300 people were killed and thousands arrested in a crackdown by the security forces that lasted days. China, Iran and Russia will hold joint naval drills in the Indian Ocean and Sea of Oman. China's defense ministry said the military exercises will be held from December the 27th to December the 30th. Ministry spokesman Wu Xian said the drill will deepen cooperation between the three countries' navies. Xian said it is not necessarily connected with the regional situation. The announcement comes amid heightened tensions between Washington and Tehran. In June, the U.S. accused Iran of attacking oil tankers in the Gulf. Washington has proposed a U.S.-led naval mission to prevent attacks on international merchant vessels. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Welcome back. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is being challenged for the leadership of his ruling Likud party. Former Minister for Education Gideon Saar has officially launched the bid to unseat Netanyahu. Saar says he will be a better option to form a government in the national elections in March. Earlier, Netanyahu failed to form the government in 2 repeat elections this year. This is the Israeli Prime Minister's first serious internal challenge in over a decade in power. He is also facing a trial on bribery and corruption charges. In Hong Kong, police and pro-democracy protesters have clashes inside shopping malls for a third straight day over the Christmas period. Protesters spent the afternoon marching through multiple malls, chanting anti-government and anti-police slogans. Riot police swooped on dozens of black-clad protesters in mall in the Typhoon district, using pepper spray as well as the blue dye to mark suspects. Further clashes broke out in 4 other malls, with police making multiple arrests. Many shops were forced to shut their storefronts on one of the busiest shopping days of the year. The protest started in June against plans to allow extradition to mainland China. The bill was withdrawn in September, but demonstrations continue and now demand full democracy and an inquiry into the police's actions. Moving on to Philippines, where Typhoon Mangkhut has hit the central parts of the country, killing 16 and affecting tens of thousands of people. Local media said over 100 homes were destroyed by the storm and huge flooding reported in many areas. Authorities say thousands of people have been left stranded as ferries and flights were cancelled. With winds of 195 kilometers per hour, the typhoon tore roofs of houses and toppled electric posts as it cut across the country. In Japan, a foreigner convicted of murdering a family of 4 has been executed. It is the country's first execution of a non-national since 2007. The Chinese man Wai Wai committed the murders in mid-2003 with 2 accomplices who were also Chinese nationals. The other 2 fled to China and were arrested there, with one executed in 2005 and the other sentenced to life. The Justice Ministry said the execution is the 39th since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe returned to power in 2012. In the Central African Republic, 11 people have been killed in the fighting between militiamen and traders in the Bangui district. Local mosque imam Abd al-Karim said the fighting began after traders took up arms to oppose taxes imposed by the militia groups. A spokesman for the UN peacekeeping force said many shops have been burned down as the fighting continues. He said the UN sent a rapid response force to the area. Voluntary firefighters put out 2 fires that were spreading in the market. The Central African Republic is one of the world's poorest and most volatile countries. In Burkina Faso, 11 soldiers have been killed after unidentified gunmen attacked a military detachment in the Somme province. Officials said the military base was attacked as soldiers were patrolling the village of Halale. Local media reported security forces managed to kill 5 gunmen in an exchange of fire. Earlier, 122 people, including women, soldiers and militants, were killed in another attack in the country. Officials said a large group of terrorists simultaneously attacked the military base and the civilian population in Arbinda. The darkest day of the year has been witnessed across Asia as a solar eclipse turned the sun into a ring of fire. The eclipse could be seen from the Middle East, India, Sri Lanka and parts of the Philippines. Crowds gathered to watch the natural phenomenon in a number of countries, including Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India and Saudi Arabia. The event has also been called the Ring of Fire. Most of Asia, Eastern Africa and Northern Australia experience only a partial solar eclipse. A solar eclipse happens when the moon passes directly between the Earth and the Sun. The Pakistan Met Department said the eclipse was visible all over the country, especially in Karachi and Gawada. The rector of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris admits there is a 50% chance the fire-ravaged landmark cannot be saved. Monsignor Patrick Chauvet said the Parisian landmark is still fragile and not out of danger. He said there is a 50% chance of the scaffolding falling onto the 3 surviving vaults of the Gothic monument. The cathedral was unable to hold Christmas services for the first time in over 200 years. The 12th century cathedral was under renovation at the time of the accidental April fire, which destroyed its roof and collapsed its spire. A staggering 8 million tons of plastic end up in the world's oceans every year. Much of it finds its way into the ocean from canals and rivers. Now, a local company in Amsterdam is working to remove plastic trash hidden under the city's waterways. More on this report.
Plastic waste, whether in a river, ocean, or on land, can persist in the environment for centuries. According to a German environmental research company, rivers are carrying up to 4 million metric tons of plastic into the sea each year. In Amsterdam, bubble barrier technology is being used to remove the plastic from its canals.
The Great Bubble Barrier is an idea that also can catch plastics which it's under the water surface, and also the smaller pieces which the boats don't get.
The company claims the bubbles don't interfere with passing boats and don't pose any danger to fish or birds.
A bubble barrier is basically a tube that we place on the bottom of a river or canal. It has holes in it and we press air through it, and that creates a bubble curtain like you see behind me. The air brings plastics that are floating in the water to the surface, and because we place it in an angle, it redirects the natural flow of the river and the plastics that are in there to the side where we collect it and where it can be removed.
The United Nations says people need to improve the management of plastic waste.
Less plastic is flowing out to the North Sea, and otherwise we also want to give insight into the total plastic problem, because the best is of course that no plastic falls into water in the first place.
The company launched the Bubble Barrier project last month after a small-scale test. If the project is successful, they have planned to deploy it in other parts of the country as well.
Researchers say they have determined a cave painting in Indonesia is the earliest known pictorial record of storytelling. The painting in question was discovered in 2017 by a group of Australian archaeologists on the island of Sulawesi. Like many other cave paintings, this one depicts humanoid figures hunting animals. What makes it unique is that it dates back around 44 millennia.
The result was yesterday's finding. There are 4 samples. They are mainly above 40,000 years old. The exact dating for the oldest one is 43,900 years old. That was found around the depiction of the pig.
The hunters shown in the painting have animal heads. Such figures can be found in ancient cultures around the world. Researchers say this is the oldest evidence of humans' ability to imagine supernatural being.
This is one form of historical heritage of how our ancestors had actually understood literacy, meaning what they see and what they experienced are being poured in a form of rock art.
The painting's age was determined by researchers from Indonesia's National Research Center for Archaeology. Some of them hypothesized the cave could have been a religious site in the prehistoric era. More stories to follow, but right after a short break, stay tuned with Indus. And now the business updates. In the United States, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq indexes hit fresh records high on optimism over a US-China trade deal. The S&P 500 is trading about 1% short of its best year since 1997. Traders returned from the Christmas break to Beijing's reaffirmation that it was in close contact with Washington about the initial agreement. On Tuesday, President Donald Trump confirmed that the pact would be formalized at a signing ceremony, but did not disclose a date or location. Hopes of a breakthrough in the trade war combined with a loose monetary policy have powered US stocks to record highs in the past few weeks. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.